All right, you guys, says we're streaming. Hello, how you guys doing? Olivia Reiner here for Packers News, joined by Ryan Wood. And guys, I hate to break it to you, but this is the last live stream we're going to be doing for a little while. Of course, pending any important breaking news, we will be with you in any moment. We can jump on here and chat with you guys. However, in terms of our regularly scheduled programming, Ryan, this is it.
This is it.
How emotional are you right now?
Here we come to the end of the road.
It is.
Little Boys and Men reference. They did the national anthem.
They did. Wow, yeah. Way to bring it all full circle, Ryan.
I was proud of that.
Very, very impressive.
Thank
Good
you.
job. Ryan Gutekunst spoke to the media today for the first time since training camp, so preseason. It's been a little while, but we know this is uncommon for general managers of years past to talk to the media, field some questions. So we did get to talk to Brian Gutekunst today for about 30 minutes, so pretty long time, but there was a lot to discuss. This is going to be a busy offseason for the Packers if they want to close that gap between them and the 49ers, which imaginably I'm sure they do.
Yeah, that's one good way to put it. Brian Gutekunst started today saying, I got a lot of Ted Thompson to me. We never saw Ted Thompson like this. So that was maybe my biggest takeaway today, is how refreshing it is to actually have an understanding of how the GM views this roster, where they've been, where they have to go. It was very telling when he talked about looking out a year ago into the future and knowing how much work he had to do, the chasm that had developed between this team and title contention. And you know, he sent messages that he was all in, but at the same time, it was out of necessity. He got a lot of work done. It's going to be different. They're hunted now, not the hunter. They've got less money after the mega contracts. There's going to be a lot that they've got to get done with restricted resources, but if they do, they can get them over the hump.
Yeah, so we'll head over straight to Facebook right away, guys. Got a few of you in here ready for your questions. Bombard us. Let us know what's on your mind. We've got Lennox in here, says he's going to miss seeing us regularly. Thank you. We're going to miss you too. Guys, it was a lot of fun interacting with you all season, but don't worry, we'll be back. It's okay. We will be back. We've got, let's see, Coach saying that they're ready for some off-season moves. I think before we can look at off-season moves, we need to talk about who they already have and who they might want to bring back as free agents. You're looking at guys like Brian Gutekunst, Mason Crosby, Tramon Williams. I feel like I'm forgetting a big name right now that's not coming to the top of my mind. Blake Martinez, who could be walking. Based off of what Brian Gutekunst said today, he didn't say anything explicitly, but read between the lines a little bit. What do you think is on his mind when it comes to those pending free agents?
Of all the names, I would think that he seemed most aggressively confident that he wants Mason Crosby back. He had a huge year. He wants his kicker back. Brian Bulaga seemed he was amenable to having him come back, but he knows it's going to be a negotiation process. And Brian Bulaga had one of the best years of his career, stayed healthy, started 16 games. He's not going to be cheap on the open market. I think he's aware of that. So that'll be interesting how that process unfolds. Tramon Williams, I'd throw, and Mercedes Lewis, I think, are both guys that a good chance that they're going to want back. Blake Martinez sure doesn't see it happening. You never know. It depends on how his market develops. It seems unlikely that he's not going to give much of a hometown discount. He's going to have better opportunities elsewhere. I'd be surprised if he was back.
So will I. I think based off of everything that Gutekunst said, it's hard to really tell exactly what he means and what he's thinking, but it did seem, just based off his comments, he had the least to say about Blake Martinez and seemed least optimistic about making an effort to bring him back.
He's asked about the run defense, and he said, obviously Blake Martinez is up, so we're going to have to take a good, long, hard look at inside linebacker, and then went right on. That's literally what he said about Blake Martinez today. So make of that what you will. You read between the lines, it sure seemed like he knows that his market's going to be probably higher, more demand elsewhere.
Steve wants to know if Jimmy Graham will retire. So Brian Gutekunst today said that he hasn't spoken to Jimmy Graham about whether or not he wants to retire. He did say he had a gut feeling that he thinks Jimmy Graham will want to stick around for another year, that last year of his contract. I mean, with Graham, he did post a kind of cryptic Instagram post the other day saying that it's been, a marvelous 10 years in the NFL. But do you think he'll want to continue his career? But would that realistically be in Green Bay if he does?
I have no idea what Jimmy Graham wants to do because let's face it, we don't talk to him very much. He's not a very revealing person, so I have no idea what he wants to do. He's had 2 bad years, and he does not run the way he used to. He's acknowledged that over and over again, that he's slower now, and I find it hard to believe that they're going to take him back. It's $3.6 million in dead money if they release him this spring. Brian Gutekunst said he was pleased to have him in that room, that tight end room as a leader, but he acknowledged that the numbers were not what most people expected. So I'd be surprised if he's back. I think of the two, Mercedes Lewis is probably more likely to be back than Jimmy Graham.
Interesting point there. Probably a less expensive option for a similar locker room type of guy.
And better blocker.
There you go. Apologies for the noise today, guys. I think there's a robotics competition happening in the atrium, so we have been booted out of what has become our typical spot in here, so apologies for that. Dan asks, do you think Green Bay should draft a quarterback? Both Matt LaFleur and Brian Gutekunst have talked a little bit about this topic, and both of them have said that they're open to considering whatever talent is available out there at the position. They both acknowledge that Aaron Rodgers is still an elite quarterback. However, if a guy happens to be there in the draft when they're picking and they think that he could be a starting NFL quarterback, they're not going to pass him up.
No, he said he's got a lot of Ron Wolf in him. And if you know anything about Ron Wolf in the 90s, he was always looking at quarterbacks. Even with Brett Favre, he was always looking at quarterbacks. I would think if it just depends on the board. And that's this GM especially, all GMs really, but this GM especially is very true to the board, very true to his evaluations. If there is sound value, which can segue us into another topic, but sound value, he won't hesitate at this point in Aaron Rodgers' career to think about who's the next quarterback. If there isn't, he won't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Craig says the Packers need to improve on the offensive line. I don't know exactly what they're going to do at the position. I think obviously the first matter of business that they have to address on the offensive line this offseason is what they're going to do with right tackle Brian Bulaga. I was talking to Jim Ozarski earlier in the week, and he said that it should be their first matter of business. Decide what you're going to do with Brian Bulaga, and then they can decide who are they taking with their first pick in the draft, because tackles aren't usually floating around in the later rounds of the draft. David Bakhtiari is probably an exception to that rule. But if the Packers are going to let Brian Bulaga walk and they want to draft a tackle, they might want to use that first pick on a tackle.
Yeah, I think chronologically that bears out. We're deciding on Brian Bulaga's future negotiations, much of which are going to kick in high gear at the Combine. That's going to be chronologically probably the first order of business. They have to decide that. It's a two-sided coin. Either they keep Brian Bulaga and they have a really good offensive line, albeit there's risk because there's a lot of mileage with Brian Bulaga at this stage in his career, but he's played at a high level when he's on the field. With him, they have one of the best tackle tandems, they have a good offensive line, or you start over at right tackle, you draft, you use a high asset on an offense that has a lot of offensive needs that Brian Gutekunst mentioned today. Receiver, I still think running back's a big need. Tight end, obviously. So it's two sides of that coin. They have to decide that pretty quickly.
Yes, they do. Dan asks, how about a wide receiver? Where are they going to find one? Brian Gutekunst today said that they are going to add to that position in the offseason. They even considered adding to that position leading up to the trade deadline. He didn't say wide receiver specifically. He said offensive skill position of some sort, but I think a lot of Packers fans out there really wanted to see another wide receiver at the position. Another wide receiver added. So that being said, today he was asked about it a little bit. He said that his scouting staff thinks that the wide receiver group at the available in the draft this year is one of the best in a long time. So I'd imagine that they're going to be looking for some receivers. And hey, depending on what ends up happening at tackle, if they're going to look for a guy in the first round, if they're not going to look for a guy in the first round, maybe they end up taking a receiver there.
Yeah, so that was the sound value thing that we were talking about earlier, where they just didn't see the sound value, but he did think about it. The one position he said before the trade deadline, it's a good year to need a receiving help. I mean, I haven't dug much into the draft yet, but everything I've seen, it should be a really good and not just talented, but deep pool of receivers. which is helpful when you're picking number 30th this year at the end of the first round, back where they used to be.
Daniel says there won't be any good tackles available at 30. Keep Bulaga and bring back Jared Valdir. So that's what Daniel's saying.
That'd kind of be my guess, too. I mean, it's early in this process, and we'll see what the market ends up doing. I haven't done any reporting on his market yet, but I would think he played himself into another contract this year.
Yeah, he had a very strong season. The only thing that might be holding him back, obviously, is his age and some of his injury history, but he had a very healthy year this past season, and I'm sure that bodes well for him, if not in Green Bay, but somewhere else on the market.
That's right.
Yeah, so let's see. Bob says cut Jimmy Graham. I think that's been a copy and paste sentiment that we've had from our comments section all season.
You don't say.
Yes. Jeff wants to know if the Packers will go after a free agent wide receiver. I think they're going to have to do whatever they need to do to add to that position, whether it's through the draft or in free agency.
My guess would be more draft than free agency, just because of the talent pool coming in from college.
Yes. Do they have cap space to add? Free agents, especially at linebacker asks Richard. Sorry, questions and comments are moving pretty quickly. So Brian Gutekunst said today that his ability, his flexibility in free agency this season will not be as great as it was last season. He was able to make some big splashes, bringing in the Smiths last season, Billy Turner, Adrian Amos. He says he hopes he can make an impact in the offseason in some capacity. He probably won't have as many resources as he did last season in free agency, but regardless, he's looking to improve the football team somehow.
Yeah, no, I don't know to the dollar cent where it's going to be, but they'll probably have about $30 million under the cap. A lot to do retaining their own talent going out. So yeah.
Yeah, Chase says the Packers need to let Blake go. Ton of tackles, but mostly 5 to 7 yards downfield. Was what Blake Martinez did this season when it comes to tackling. Is that just the nature of the position, or does it have to do with his skill level?
Well, Mike Pettine, his system is designed so that the big guys up front kind of clear the wash and take blockers, and keep them from going to the second level, so that Blake Martinez or the inside linebacker has freedom to roam, be a tackle machine. So it's very system driven. Blake Martinez is a good fit in that system. He's had a lot of tackles. He's really the command center of that defense from a cerebral sense, but a lot of it is also the scheme.
Daniel says that Jace Sternberger and Mercedes Lewis could be the Packers starting tight ends next year. It's interesting to see how much growth Jace Sternberger took this year, especially after the injury that he sustained during training camp, coming back during the season. Brian Gutekunst commended him because unlike training camp during the regular season, when you come back, you're not getting nearly as many reps as you once were in training camp, and for him to be able to still crack the active roster on game day and make some sort of impact, although he wasn't always catching balls, he was doing something. Brian Gutekunst spoke very highly of that.
He was pleased with what he saw this year, and he caught the touchdown in the NFC Championship game, and we'll see what he can do building on in the future.
Yeah, what's interesting, Robert Tonyan seemed to have fallen off after the injury that he sustained in Dallas, Week 5 with the hip. He was out for several games, and after that, we really didn't hear as much from him. I'm curious to see what his future might be in Green Bay.
It'll be interesting. They need both talent at the top of the depth chart and also depth throughout the depth chart. I mean, they need a lot of work there. So we're Robert Tonyan and, frankly, Jay Sternberger as well fall into that. We'll see once the shuffle kind of clears up.
Mark says that the Packers need a couple of defensive linemen that can help Kenny Clark. What did you make of what Brian Gutekunst had to say? He said that he really likes Dean Lowry, Tyler Lancaster. He thinks that Kingsley Keke and Montravius Adams can make a jump heading into this next year. I think we all thought that about Montravius Adams this past offseason, thinking that he would make a jump into this year. He didn't really do that. He seemed happy based off of his comments with the guys that he has there. What do you think? What do you think they need to add, if anything, at defensive line?
He'll do his due diligence there. Same for offensive line. Big guys win games in this league, so if there's more talent they can add, he will. The big takeaway from that position group is that he prioritized. He wants to get something done with Kenny Clark before training camp, before 2020 begins, which is the final year of his deal. But he also was, I thought, pretty clear that it's not going to be overnight. I mean, there's going to be a process here from both sides to establish what the value is and reach an agreement.
I saw a question earlier. I apologize, I don't have your name, but someone had asked about the decision to keep Mike Pettine on as defensive coordinator heading into his third year. Was that more of a Matt LaFleur decision, or is that a Mark Murphy decision, or is it some combination of both?
Yes. It's a really good question. I would think Matt LaFleur starts with it. I also, with how many meetings they have together, both Matt LaFleur, Brian Gutekunst, and even Russ Ball with Mark Murphy, I would imagine that there's some input on some level to that type of a decision as well, but I think it starts with the head coach.
All right, well, there's some stability there at coordinator. We'll see if any of the coaches get shaken up, the assistants, but for right now, nothing that we know of just yet. But yeah, guys, I think that's going to do it for us today. I'm kind of getting a little emotional right now, Ryan. This is the end of a chapter, guys. Thank you for everything this season. We really appreciate your participation. We wouldn't be able to do this without you guys. You guys are what make this conversation a lot of fun. So thank you so much for joining us. We will be back hopefully soon, definitely for the Combine. We'll be live every day once we're at the Combine and breaking down what's going on, sharing some insight with you guys. But yeah, until then, thank you so much for joining us. Ryan, any final words for our friends?
I already sang, so I think that's
enough?
I sang for you.
Awesome. Thank you.
I don't do that for everyone.
yeah, it's don't take that for granted, guys. All right. Have a great